The digital art era is here. AI and art creation tools empower anyone to make it. Blockchain technologies allow anyone to own it. VR, AR, and extended reality immerse us in it. Let's talk to artists and innovators behind the visual magic. I'm your host, Roger Dickerman. Welcome to the future of art. Today, we welcome Grant Yoon. Grant is an artist and self-titled neo-precisionist with a diverse set of influences ranging from nostalgia in video games to art history in museums to a distinct color palette born in the Midwest. He exploded onto the NFT scene in 2021, and he's since compiled a who's who of collectors, auction houses, and enthusiasts. Grant is disciplined in creative process, realistic in his assessment of digital art today. He's a proponent of physical display, and he's someone who takes nothing for granted in his pursuit of contemporary art relevance and legacy. I really enjoyed this one and hope it inspires you as well. Let's get to it.
Thanks for having me.
So good to have you here, and there's such a diversity of topics that I want to dig into, but I'm going to give you the hardest question first, and that is, what does art mean to you?
Art to me is art to me is a means of communicating. And so just as you read my posts on Twitter or we converse here, over Zoom, um, most of the time artists have a meaning behind the work that they create, whether it's intentional or not. And the viewer who looks at that piece of work is going to have a different interpretation of what that piece means on a person-to-person basis. So it's really a form of communication that is used to talk from one person to another. And oftentimes art is probably the most robust medium through which you can do this when it comes to long-term horizons, as we can have conversations between artists from thousands of years ago or artists of today. And some of these things, some of these forms of conversation, such as text or talking in person, might not have such long time horizons. So it really is just a means through which we can communicate with one another.
I love that you use the words communicate and conversate, because I think you're probably, for my money, one of the best communicators in the entire broader digital art space. And I want to point to, and I would recommend that anyone who's not as familiar with you to go immediately to your pin post on Twitter, which is your Medium article, and how you review your art career and sort of the making of you, right, is fascinating to me. And I want to poke at the influences that you shared in that article. And loosely speaking, if I were to summarize, you go to culture and video games, you go to the physical environment around you, the locations that you've been, you go to art history, and then you go to the actual tools that you're using for digital art creation. How would you approach that topic of your influences?
As in, try to elaborate a little bit on.
Yeah, elaborate on how all of those things come together to make the Grant Yoon that we see today.
I think a lot of my work is focused on nostalgia. Um, I think as a person, I'm pretty nostalgic, and I do my best not to, but I find myself time and time again trying, like, having a very difficult time letting go of the past. So, um, right here, even here, my fiance and I like to do these things called, just called scrapbooking or journaling, and we take these little, passport size, notebooks, and we literally just like scrapbook our life experiences. Um, and we have tons of these, right? And they date back years and years, and I just like lock them up, and then every, several months I take a look at them and just reminisce on things from the past. But it kind of extends beyond that as well, where I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just like trying to be cool or hipster or something. But I really enjoy things from like the past as well that, you know, from periods of time I have not personally been alive during, like, I love collecting, vinyl records and all that sort of things. And I think when I create art, it's really kind of a reflection of things that I romanticize about from the past and also things from my personal past. And so it's kind of a blend of all those things. And the art that I create really is just for myself. I mean, I look at some of the art that I create and I really like it and I like looking at it. And if you like it as as a viewer, then that's great, but it's really just for me and yeah, I do have some messages, in my works, but it's I'm happy with however anyone interprets my work.
I enjoy that you're not afraid to say that your art is great. And you say it occasionally. You say it, but you'll just say it, just bluntly on the nose. I love my art. And sometimes when someone says that, it's posturing. And in your case, it feels completely honest.
Yeah, I think when I first started digital art, there was a vision I had on what I wanted to create, but I just didn't think I just don't think I had the technical skill to create what I wanted to. But also I just didn't know what my style was ultimately going to be. But now that I know what it is I want to create and how I want to do it, um, I'm really just creating art for myself and I'm not gonna share I'm not gonna share a completed illustration if I'm not really proud of it. And so I'm just happy to create art and I'm happy to share the ones um that I'm proud about.
You clearly have a reverence for museums and going to museums. They're a part of your past, and you've mentioned some different ones that you've gone to. Observing art, you also call yourself a neo-precisionist, and you describe an experience where you had sort of already formulated your style or where your style was headed. And then you found the history of a specific, art era. Did it feel like coming home in a sense? Did it feel like weirdly connecting these dots, like half of which you'd already discovered, and then half of which you were in the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like I have these aha moments in different parts of my life as well, just outside of art. But yeah, I think I just wasn't as well versed in art when I was first starting out, obviously. And so just as I slowly educated myself by just going to museums, right, and going to galleries, just slowly but surely there were pieces that really that really spoke to me. And it was really just like kind of branching out my education about art from that particular like timestamp and then just kind of growing my inspirations. So yeah, there are like certain artists and certain pieces that I've seen in museums that really have just like pushed me in the direction that I wanted to go.
What's the most recent example of such a piece?
The most recent example is probably, I can't think of a particular painting, but um recently I've been going into, so there's like when you go into most kind of museums of art, it's like there's kind of the really old art, right? Like super ancient, like Egyptian and Greek and whatever. And then you go kind of into the art of like the Enlightenment era. And then you go into like contemporary art, so post-war art, like post-World War II art. But kind of in between all of that, there is like impressionism and art kind of like in that transition period where people are beginning to break out of a specific mold that they've been told is and is not art. And I think seeing a lot of the impressionist works and seeing the type of spontaneity that they create um, is something that's been really inspiring. And I think that's really something that I try to create with my own art, and I have been. And so I think part of me kind of regrets not being so focused on that genre of art when I first was going to museums, because now I have to go back to all the museums that I've been to so I can kind of go back and look at some of the works that I probably was not paying too much attention to.
It could be a benefit too. It could be a gift having to go back to the museums, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. But there's just some museums that I probably won't be able to go back to for a long time.
Fair, fair. What prompted your color shift? A couple other things I picked out. You had marked really a I guess a moment, right? And even going back to your earlier works that are minted in the digital art space, there's a bit of ping ponging around. Like you could see some experimentation going on. And then it feels like there's this lock in, right? There's this lock in, and I would never box you into that. There are going to be many, I'm sure there are going to be many eras of Grant Yoon, but whatever we want to frame this specific era as, the 2022-23 era of Grant Yoon, there's definitely a clear turning point. What prompted the color palette?
Um, it was really this work right here. Um, so this work, here's a better version of it. This work was created right after I came back from the Whitney. And we were talking about kind of those moments where, like, those aha moments, going to museums and such. And one of those moments was when I saw Paul Revere, Grant Wood's Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And at that moment, I kind of knew that this is how I wanted to shape the vision for my art. And so I was really inspired by like regionalist artists at that time. And so lots of kind of yellows and oranges and lots of like various shades of green, that were all kind of pastel in nature, because it really was like a representation of kind of the Midwest. So a lot of the artists live here or have lived here in this area. So like Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, kind of this entire Midwest area. And so that's what really prompted me to start creating this color palette. So I created this work. It was kind of inspired by that and inspired by my time in Wisconsin. I think at that time I was maybe 3, 4 years into Wisconsin. I'm originally from San Jose, California. And so I wanted to create something that was kind of a representation of my own experiences living in a new place, especially some place that's like I'm from the Bay Area, and so it's like quite different driving around kind of, you know, Northern California and driving through just like from city to city in the Midwest, lots of crops and fields and extremely flat versus kind of the mountainous terrain of the Bay Area. And so that's really what prompted me to create this color palette. And I remember I posted this on Reddit and it like made the front page several times through like different subreddits. And so um at that moment, like I knew that like, it got, I can't even remember how many it got, like likes it got, maybe like 50 grand or 50,000 or something. But it was just like at that moment I knew that I had created something like really special. And so I wanted to continue creating that series, from like inspired by that particular illustration. And so I created my series called Midwest, which is really just like my personal kind of reflection of what it was like to live in a new place in Wisconsin, coming from San Jose, California. Um, and then over the past couple of years, it's really just been kind of like tweaking those colors a little bit. So maybe more pastel, maybe I'm switching to more browns or more grays, but ultimately it's kind of like it's all been kind of like starting like stemming from this particular image right here.
When you think about regions and geography and the inspiration that can come with your surroundings and going from San Jose to the Midwest, going through one major shift, does that make you, when you do travel, like let's say you travel into New York City or you travel abroad, does that make you approach a new location with different eyes? Are you naturally looking for inspiration in the landscape that surrounds you?
Yeah, I think so. I used to compete a lot, for breakdancing, for breaking, around the Midwest. So, we would go to, competitions we call jams. We would go to jams like, Minnesota and Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, obviously, and Chicago, and, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we would spend like hours and hours, and I was still in school then. So we would just spend a weekend driving like 6 hours one direction and then 6 hours back like that night. And I think during those travels, it would be almost every weekend for, the first like 3, 4 years of my time here in Wisconsin. A lot of the times, people really dread just driving for long periods of time, but I think like it was really inspiring for me. And to this day, like today or I guess this weekend, we'll be driving up to uh to a city up north, and like to me, like driving through like all the different kind of areas of the Midwest is just really inspiring to me. Like seeing the crops and seeing how people live, um, kind of in rural areas, I think is like a really cool. It's really eye-opening to me, and it's something that I want to showcase through my art as well. So a lot of my art is like focused on rural areas, but just the same when I like drive into the city, in Manhattan, like I'm also inspired, and I try to look for things that really stick out to me. And it doesn't have to be something that's like really eye-catching, but something that just seems really personal to myself. And so yeah, I do my best to just keep a open mind wherever I go.
Where does photography come in for you? Because when I hear you talk about that, you talk about something that means something to you, capturing things, the long drives, going to a breakdance competition, 6 hours in a car, maybe looking at different landscapes. And you mentioned I think the first thing you had said at what, 5 years old was that you wanted to be a photographer, right? Is photography an influence for you?
Yeah, yeah. I think I probably wouldn't be here without photography. Even to this day, I shoot a lot of photos, but I just don't think my photography as a skill is strong enough to, I just don't think it's strong enough relative to my art. And I know it's something that I could probably get it to that point if I were to work on it, just practice makes perfect, but I'm just happy with where I am with my art. But in terms of my photography, the reason I do a lot of my art is because I don't think I can create the compositions I want to with my photography. And if I was like a master level photographer, I probably wouldn't be doing art, honestly, like wouldn't be illustrating because I would be able to create those images with my camera. Because a lot of my art is, kind of grounded in reality, and a lot of these compositions could very well exist in real life. And that's part of the reason that makes me really happy with the art I create, because a lot of people can look at it and pinpoint a time and place in their life where it it you know it reminds them of. And so yeah, I think photography to this day is inspiring. I don't necessarily look at other photographers, so if you were to ask me who inspires me, I would probably just list off some artists in Web3, because I honestly like don't take the time to like really research or learn about photographers. Um, but it's just like something that I personally am very passionate about.
Let me hone it in. Let me go to the Web3 photography crowd. And if you Matrix style today could just implant a chip in your brain and you would automatically have their technical skill set, what's one person that comes to mind?
Probably Kath and Guido, those two guys. And probably Drift as well. I know I listed like the top photographers in our space, but I mean they're top photographers for a reason, right? I mean I think each of them brings something that's really unique, um, and a different form of composition building as well. That I think some, if you think about it like a Venn diagram, there will be overlapping groups of people who appreciate all those photographers I just mentioned, but you know, some of those photographers are more polarizing than others, and um, but I've seen, all of them are quite polarizing in the comments, and have received criticisms individually. But to me personally, I enjoy all of them. So
It's a good list. It's a
yeah.
very, very strong list. Give you a little curveball here. So one thing that I find fascinating about you is it seems like you're a full-time artist, and yet you're as prodigious, right, in both your art and your communication as any full-time artist. And yet when we pan out and we look at all of the things that you have going on, you've been very transparent about medical school, you've been very transparent about your belief in physical wellness and how you take care of your body and stay active. How do those things play a role?
Um, Honestly, I feel as though I probably wouldn't be here as an artist if I wasn't in medical school. There is this sense of urgency that I feel when I'm in like actively in school, um, where there's deadlines I need to hit. I need to wake up at a particular time to go to a particular place. And then, when I'm at work, I have to be at work. I mean, I can be on Twitter, but I can't be illustrating. And so I feel like this sense of urgency that I need to create this, a composition or do a commission within this particular time frame. So it almost feels like homework, right? But in a good way. I think I realized like over the past decade of my life that the times I'm most miserable emotionally and from like a mental health perspective is when I have nothing to do. So in between the times, right, like for example, when I graduated college and I was applying to medical school, there was this period of time I was not working. I was just doing commissions and kind of creating art for myself. And that was extremely difficult. I told myself I have to create a work of art every single day while I wasn't working. So whether that's I go out and take one photograph or I complete an illustration or do a commission, or create my website or whatever. Like I have to do something that keeps me grounded. And it honestly was extremely difficult to do so. And there's times even now where, like we don't have very much of a summer break, but if I have a week off of work or something, um, that's like the time where I get the least productive with my art. And funny enough, like you might think like, oh, now I have a week off, like I can like crank out all these works of art, but I suddenly lose like my sense of like yeah, my sense of schedule really. It's hard to wake up in the morning. I kind of go to sleep whenever. I feel really bored. But then once school kicks back in or work kicks back in, like I'm ready to go, and that's when I'm the most productive with my art.
It's interesting, right? Productivity snowballs and lack of productivity snowballs as well.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
And also what came to mind there is the power of constraints when you are operating and firing on all cylinders, and let's say in school or focused on fitness, when you have a concrete period of time to focus on your art, but you sort of know that that window is finite. Does that inspire you?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a reason like procrastination is a real thing. I mean, most people I know in medical school, um, when it comes to assignments and things we need to do, just like applying or taking tests, or preparing for tests, will either prepare at the very beginning when they find out about what they need to do, or we'll do it at the very end, and procrastinate to the very end. And very rarely do you see people who are like consistently like, oh, I'll do one assignment, every day for the next month, right? It's like I'll crank out all these assignments at the very beginning or at the very end. Um, and yeah, that's how I feel about my art. And so having these time constraints makes me just just stay really focused on my art, because a lot of the times, it's hard to stay focused like if you have nothing to do. Like if I had like an empty day without any agenda, like I could like sit down, try to do some illustrating, get distracted, like go on YouTube, and then like 30 minutes later I've done like 3 minutes of illustrating and like 30 minutes of YouTube. And whereas if I was like, okay, I only have an hour before I have to go to bed for work tomorrow, then I'll do an hour of art.
Yeah, what's Parkinson's law, right? Your effort will what does it expand to the time that you have to participate in it? Something along those lines. I think you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Take us back to January 2021. So something that you said relatively recently is, February 2021, zero Twitter followers, and your art career was then not where it is today. And things can happen quite fast and with such speed and ferocity when things really get moving. Take us back to January 2021. What did being Grant feel like then versus when things got kickstarted February and beyond?
Um, Feb January 2021, to be honest with you, I wasn't too much different than I am now. What was I? I was a first or second year medical student, just, doing school. doing a lot of art, so I was really motivated to continue to try and expand my reach. So I was still applying to a lot of random things like magazines and online forums and stuff to showcase my work. And that really just kept going until I was accepted to Super Rare. After I was accepted, I think the a couple like really notable moments was the first sale I made, which was the first couple days after I was onboarded onto Super Rare. I think I sold for 0.44 ETH. I think that was like $700 at that time, which, I was into crypto, but no one was paying me, right? I was putting my own money in. So that was quite yeah, that was quite eye-opening for me. But it took some time for me to realize like what this space is, and I think a lot of artists are afraid to admit it, for good reason, and also they probably aren't self-aware enough, but I think a lot of artists take this space as a way to just create a lot of cash, a lot of like very fast. And I don't mean artists at the top who are, I'm not talking about like open editions or whatever, like large size editions. I'm really talking about artists who comment in frustration that they're not making money in the space, where, you know, and they'll comment as a reaction to kind of trying to tear down someone else's work, saying that it shouldn't be worth that much, or or it's a Ponzi, or whatever. And I think I just wasn't aware. I think I was in that kind of same mentality when I first started, where I wasn't bitter with anyone, but I just didn't realize like this was going to be something really important. And so I minted a lot of works that just kind of was not the most honest representation of myself as an artist, which I don't regret because it's like a nice little reminder for where I started. But um I was really thankful, I am really thankful that I finally discovered like what it means to be in the space. And like I think I had always told myself that, when I started digital art, like my number one goal was, to be auctioned at an auction house, because I didn't know anything about art, but I just assumed that that was something that was really important. Now that, you look back on it, like it is a monumental moment, but it's also kind of something that normies will look at and say, this is really cool, right? Like the most praise I ever got from people outside of Web3 was when my art was on Times Square, right? And that was really cool, but that was, not even remotely close to being, a top kind of memory or moment for me as an artist. Um, but sorry, I digress. So I sold for 0.44 ETH. That was pretty monumental for me. Another monumental moment for me was, I think sometime that month or maybe a month later, there was a collector that wanted to buy each one of my works for 2 ETH each. And it was three of my pieces actually. And so I think he spent 6 ETH on me in one night, and I've never seen that much, that amount of money ever like paid to me before. And so that was really cool. And that's probably one of the most meaningful moments to me still to this day. Just because it was just because there was such a stark contrast between how much I was making prior and to that moment. Um, and since then, I'm still kind of in school. I still do the things that I do. Nothing's really changed. I just am a little bit more busy going to, random NFT things and doing more NFT calls and being on Twitter a little bit more, but nothing's really changed that much.
I'm curious though, going back to something that you said that you occupied a similar headspace to some of the things that you see, meaning you were a little bit bitter, you didn't quite get what being in the space meant. What was the turning point there? How did you reframe your paradigm?
The first thing was I never really used Twitter until later in the year. So I made one because Super Rare had asked me like what my Twitter handle was. So like in the application form, they were like, "What's your Twitter handle?" So I created a Twitter that day, basically, or I think I had one, but like I found it again and I just gave it to them because like I was like, "Oh well, if they're asking for a Twitter handle, then they probably are not gonna select me as an artist if I don't have one." So I just gave it to them. Um, After I got accepted, I kind of just posted my work, like just like, "Oh hey, here's my art," and then like, I post it and then like close out of Twitter and then go on Instagram or something, right? And then there were a couple moments where I was like, okay, this is like something I should be focused on is um after I got a few more sales, I began to feel like there was a sense of responsibility to try and at least be more informative on Twitter because people are spending money on my work. And so maybe it's just better to, keep people in the loop on what I'm doing. Another really big moment was, I had mentioned that I was creating a lot of, I was minting a lot of different kind of styles that wasn't necessarily the most honest representation of myself, which I don't think I regret. I actually love all the work that I've minted, and so I don't necessarily think that it's like worse. I just don't think that's my personal favorite. Obviously, as we've seen what my art is today, but someone from Super Rare who I'll just keep anonymous reached out to me and said, "There's a lot of people that want to buy your work, but they're just afraid of what they're gonna get because you create all these different types of art and it's not very consistent." And he was like, "It's not something that I'm telling you you have to do. It's just something that I've heard that you might want to know." And so basically, since that day, and I can't remember when that was, maybe March or April, or maybe even late February of the same year, 2021. Um, at that moment, I was like, "Oh, okay, I should probably be more serious about what I'm trying to show." So that was one moment. And then once I like finally figured out how to use Twitter, then I like found the community that was trying to grow into like a more serious art platform. And I think just like slowly over time I've realized like, yeah, this is something that's more than just like I need to make X amount of money in X amount of time, and if someone does it faster than I do, then I'm gonna complain about it.
One of my favorite phenomenons, I mean, we all exist in a 24/7, 365, financial market backdrop, and that's real. It's part of the space, and I think when you think about it, we wouldn't have it any other way. But it does create some interesting challenges. One of my favorite phenomenons that's occurred in a down cycle, right? The recent, whatever we want to call it, quote unquote bear market, right? There are these voices that are stepping forward with absolute conviction. A couple people that come to mind: Patrick Amadon, Coldy. But you feel them stepping, whether it's stepping into their own skin, a new phase of self, but they're really grabbing the mic with just more conviction. And I feel like you do also fall into that category. Do you feel that yourself, or are you just being you?
Um, there is days where I have more doubt than others, not about myself, but about what's gonna happen to this whole thing. Um, yeah, I think it's cool to see that there are some legacy collections being created right now, like for example, squiggles and fidenzas and punks, um, potentially apes, um, that, might be a reflection of just a lack of buyers and, such, and, lack of money going around and, people running out of money to buy things, etc. But for whatever it is, there are some collections that can still sell, um, not like, fideszas don't sell every day, but when they do sell, they sell for, quite high, and they still hold a pretty high floor, just as squiggles do and just as punks do. Um, and so I think just over time, there will be certain collections that become cemented in just culture, whether that's internet culture, which I could, which I probably will see, which I probably predict we will be seeing with punks, right? I mean, right now people look at a punk and a lot of people will probably just think it's an NFT, but I'm sure, in 10, 20 years time, there will be a moment where people are just like, oh, that's a punk, right? Like it's not, they don't even have to like say it's an NFT or anything. Just the same, I think there will come a time where Fidenza is like in a museum, and it could be printed or it could be shown on digital display, and like only people who are like 60 plus years old will have to listen to the audio, headphones, and learn that this is NFT, and most people will just like understand, like just when it says like, oh, it's on the blockchain or something, like everyone would understand what that means, right? And just like the physical representation is not a reflection of what the actual digital asset is, like in a museum. And so there will be moments, I think, where some collections will just become part of like society. And so part of me is really like has a lot of conviction about certain collections, but another part of me is like worried that there's just too many collections and not enough eyeballs at the moment, that a lot will just go under the table, and I'm sure some will resurface as people who get more interested come back and quote unquote rediscover certain collections that maybe didn't get the appreciation they deserved. But I'm sure there's going to be a lot that could have been, quote unquote, the next Videnza if it launched in 2021, but now is something that people just don't ever talk about because it launched in 2023. Um, and that's, I think, I mean, that's just my opinion. And I'm not talking about any particular collection, but I'm just saying, I just think that's just something honest that I have to say. For myself, um, I think I talked about this somewhere else, but I think it depends on what artists want on an individual basis when it comes to their careers, their quote unquote art careers, right? Some people come from art, like the fine art world, so I think they're fine. Some people come from like industry, so a lot of people, right? A lot of digital artists come from industry, so concept artists, or you know, being part of visual effects for video games or movies, etc. And then artists such as myself who didn't have anything of a career before all of this. Is really about trying to figure out what each artist wants from all of this. And for me, I think I want to be part of the contemporary art space. And so all these sales and all these works of art that I've created don't necessarily mean anything, right? In terms of contemporary art, like it's not a golden ticket, at least as of right now. Maybe it will be in the future where, my NFTs will just be shown in a museum or in a large contemporary gallery and people would just be like, oh, okay, cool. But at the moment, it's not, right? I mean, these ecosystems are just like so far from each other, with very small overlap in the form of big contemporary artists getting into NFTs and maybe auction houses kind of throwing NFTs into a large lot, sale. But for myself, I think I have some of the tools and some of the personal connections to get to where I want, but it's really just on me to put some more work in. And the path is obviously not very clear because digital artists haven't been taken seriously until basically last year or 2021. So there's a lot of work to be done, but pretty pretty convinced that I can get it done with some time and some effort.
Yeah, it's interesting reverse engineering that outcome, right? Because I think we both agree. Well, you tell me, but I think based on something you said earlier, we agree that in X number of years or even quantifying it in decades, this all will be obvious. But that doesn't change the fact that it may take years or decades to get there to that obvious state. So reverse engineering like that outcome that you want for yourself, ideally in the shorter to midterm, right? Not having to wait all that time is interesting.
Yeah, I think when we say we're all gonna make it, I really think what we're saying is punks are gonna make it and ringers are gonna make it and day one and maybe season 1 to 3, maybe not even that, maybe just a few select season 1 to 3 art blocks will make it and maybe apes will make it, right? But that doesn't mean you are gonna make it, right? So um I just don't want to be on the sideline watching the whole space be really successful, but I like didn't take advantage of the opportunities that I had because I do have a lot of opportunities, like just to, I think we all do, but I in particular, of course, like have a certain level of opportunity from kind of the sales and such that I've done over the past couple years. So, I might as well take advantage of it and do my best.
Where do physicals play into your vision? The importance of physicals, prints, and the like.
Um, I really dislike my art shown digitally. It's fine if it's like you're looking on your phone or on your computer. That's completely fine. But like if I go to a gallery, like I don't wanna I don't wanna hate on my friends who run galleries with TV screens. So I'm not gonna be too harsh on this, you know, on this comment, but I just personally don't like my own art on digital displays, relative to seeing it printed and framed um and I think that like when it comes to my art, like that's ultimately what I want to do. Like when I create like when I'm going to like try to figure out a way to get into contemporary art spaces, I think it will come through the form of like printmaking and figuring out how to translate digital art onto physical canvases. Um, but still staying pretty true to myself and being a digitally native artist without necessarily needing to do canvas work first, right? And so but yeah, I see a lot of my work like as physical prints and framed and signed, um, just because like my art is really dull to begin with. Like there's not any light or anything that like really is like required to view my art to the fullest extent. And if anything, like things that like have backlight on them create too much contrast on the eyes and it just makes the composition like not how I want it shown. And so having it printed actually is probably the best way to view my art. And obviously this is not the case with a lot of artists. I mean, you obviously can't print a video. And a lot of artists, do things with dynamic lighting and such where like you really require screen and backlight displays. But for my art in particular, like I go in with the mindset that this is supposed to look like a painting, but it's a digital painting. And so um it should be printed and framed and just kind of displayed on the wall as a static image.
Does that partly relate to screen tech as it exists today in 2023, or do you think that's irrelevant and how you feel will continue to be the way you feel?
Um, I think going back to that nostalgia thing, I think part of it is like this is how the old world did it. So I'd like to continue that tradition of, you know, we 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 view art as static images that you print or you paint on a canvas. Um, but another part of me is like really open to like technology. And the thing that I've been thinking about for a while now is it'd be really cool like if we had color display that was like priced low enough where it was like affordable for the average consumer, of like a Kindle display where it's like no glare, no backlight, um, and it doesn't look like paper, but it definitely doesn't look like any other, digital display that you see. I think that would probably be like I would totally be open to something like that, as long as it can accurately reflect, the colors and stuff from the image.
I think that's fascinating to envision one of your artworks on almost, I know this may not be exactly what you were saying, but it's where my mind ended up going, almost to a matte display would be really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, like a matte display, but just it's just like the color thing, like the colors have to be like accurate, and I just don't think we're there. And I also don't think it's affordable enough.
Right, right. And I keep saying I think that's where digital art really takes over, right? I think there will be room for all forms of art, but I think it's where it takes a huge, huge leap where you have an affordable screen that can compete with the art that you find where someone gets a new home or a new apartment and they go to a store where they can buy, let's say, a 100 or $150 piece of artwork. That's maybe a little bit generic that a lot of people own all over the place, but it's just what they like and what they use to decorate their home. I think when a screen can compete on that cost basis and possibly feature multiple digital artworks and maybe a subscription service of some kind, I think digital art takes a massive leap.
Yeah, and also maybe it might take another generation for people to see digital art as an equivalent art form as things like on the wall.
Fair, fair. Let's talk about Creative Commons, CC0, CCO. You are a proponent. Well, at least let me not bias the conversation. Let's start a layer back for those maybe not familiar with the discussion. How would you describe CC0 and what fascinates you about it?
Zero is basically just giving up your IP rights for whatever you decide to designate as CC0. So for the most part, we've seen that it's like a piece of art that you create, that you basically just sign a waiver saying that, you give up all your rights, so you can't legally track down people to copyright strike them if they use your art in any form. Sorry, what was the second half of the question? What was my opinion on it?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think I talked about this on a podcast last week, but long story short, I think it's a horrible business model for a business. Um, so when you see my posts of CC0, I think a lot of them are mostly just focused on why I decided to do CC0, but it's never about why I think it's a good thing for other people to do. Actually, I think it's a very bad thing for most people, for anyone to do, like without giving it like a lot of thought. Which is why even to this day, I haven't CC zeroed anything since I CC zeroed like one of my works like last year or maybe a year and a half ago, whenever that CC0 conversation, was brought up on, in the space, because I think it's really cool to distribute your art as much as possible. And that's really what you want with CC0, right? You want to share your art with the world, and you want no boundaries between you and anything, and find a way to like translate your vision, your original vision to, as as much as possible. But the problem is that IP rights are basically all you have as an artist, right? And all you have as a business. And so you have to really be honest with yourself about why you're doing CC0. So, I mean, from a business perspective, if you have shareholders or you have a profit model, I think a lot of it is built on, IP at the end of the day. And so probably would not, and, I don't know very much about, creating business, etc. But still, even from my small brain, I think that's probably not something that you should be doing. From an artist perspective, it's also really similar, I mean, artists are individual businesses basically, and they have their own ways that they create money and profit, and it's not always just selling one work at a time in this contemporary art fashion. It's quite literally selling IP rights for something, and so I think people just have to be honest with themselves and realize, like, am I willing to give away everything with this work of art that I created? And I won't regret if I miss out on $100 or $10 million, by signing away all my rights. And this is a conversation that I've had with myself a lot, which is why I won't necessarily like tell anyone to like take a work of art down that they used from my art, and that they've copied. Um, but I haven't CC zeroed most of my art just yet. And I think I still potentially can, but I just need to give it some more thought and also just need to just wait really and have things play out over time because relative to just the rest of the world, especially like contemporary art, like the top artists in Web3 are still very, very small, right? And so the extent to which their personal brand and the works that they create, we still don't know like what the ultimate reach is. And like if you CC zero all your work as a small artist, who's selling for 1, 2 ETH, and then you suddenly become, the next Warhol, and suddenly like all the original work that was really, all your original work now is really expensive and people are just copying it left and right and you just lost all your rights because, you signed it off when you were small. Um, I just don't want to be in that position is ultimately what I'm trying to say.
I think that contextualization is really smart and really necessary. I think as a space, but it just as humanity, as the world, we're so conditioned to say this is great or this is bad, right? It's very hard sometimes to exist in the gray area. And so, yeah, I think the one outstanding question there when it comes to the case study you just mentioned, let's say a smaller artist does go CC zero, they become big. How much does provenance matter? I think that's a huge and very, very meaningful question and is partly contingent upon how the blockchain evolves and how art ownership evolves. And it rests on so many variables, but it really all comes back to that, where I could see it working out well and I could see it working out horribly.
Yeah, the provenance argument only matters if you're talking about art as like through which you would buy and sell it as a like in contemporary art, right? As individual assets. At that point, then the provenance probably does matter. If you are just like you just find commercial success as like a toy maker, with your art, and now all these toy companies like Hasbro is like selling your art because you CC zeroed it and you basically sold off all the rights and now you can't make a single penny from, selling your rights off. Um, provenance, like no one gives a shit about provenance, it's like, I mean, it's just a different business. And so, um, the provenance matters. It's a weird discussion, I think. I think the provenance will actually matter a lot if we're talking about, and I'm assuming you're talking about kind of selling and buying art as individual assets, at which point,
That's right. And I love where your mind went with that. And I think it's so necessary, where I am talking about it exactly in that context, but you just went another necessary level, which is to broaden out and to talk about other verticals and not just the singular asset and other expressions of that asset. And that's really something that's not often talked about.
yeah, just to finish that thought up, I think the provenance will matter. I think it won't hurt, but I think it's going to be a long time before it actually does matter. I think the work, the collection and the work and the artist have to be first well recognized. And I think at the very last moment, like the very last moment before you hit like a career peak is like when the actual previous owners actually matter, right? Before that, I don't think it matters too much. So like some of the Fidenzas out there, like sure, it was owned by, this person, it was owned by Snowfro and now it's being sold. I think that would only matter once, Fidenzas actually become like a collection that exists in like museums and stuff. I don't think it's a narrative driving conversation, like a very strong narrative driving conversation for the short term. Um, but in terms of the other side of things that I was talking about, I mean, there's a lot of artists that I think want to go into, like, want to use their reach that they've received from Web3 to go into kind of business and industry type of things, like, being a toy maker, like I had mentioned. Even like, what are they, pudgy penguins or sappy seals? They're like trying to do like toys and stuff. Like, so like it is happening, and I think it'd be cool too if I had a toy like at Target or something, or at Walmart. So I think it's just like, if that's where your mind is going, then you really have to like think about the IP thing like very seriously. And honestly, it's probably not financial advice and not any form of advice, but if it were up to me, I probably wouldn't be CC zeroing everything, because who knows if you become like a huge success, and you suddenly are in a position where you're famous but you make no money.
I think this is an important clip out. I think it's important to listen to it from 0 to 1. Get the entire perspective, because there are possibly some strong positives, but there are a host of other considerations for sure. Grant, when you think, as we get closer to wrapping up here, and you think about the future of art, right? The name of the show, I'm going to ask you 2 questions about the future of art, and you can take it anywhere you want. You could take it completely personally. You could take it related to the Web3 space. You could take it to the broader contemporary art, larger space. 1, what do you expect? What do you expect from the future? And 2, what do you hope for? In other words, something that you don't necessarily expect to happen, but that you're rooting for.
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit, but I expect there to be no, this is funny because I was actually gonna make a Twitter post on this yesterday, but I was driving or something. I can't remember why I didn't make this post. I think sometimes it's just really hard to translate what I want to say and my thoughts, through a Twitter post. I think when it comes to mass adoption, that word NFT will like no longer exist. I think for gaming, for everyday internet things like, Reddit, avatars, which we're seeing, um, like for tickets, like if you want to buy like concert tickets in a form on the blockchain, or like quite literally anything that is like more geared towards actual mass adoption and common like consumer goods, I think it'll just be digital asset, and literally no one will know that it's an NFT. Like, I mean, if we're talking about NFTs, like a CSGO skin, or like avatars that you buy on and skins that you buy on video games, like all of them like are technically non-fungible tokens that operate in a closed ecosystem from a video game video game company, right? Just not a it's just not a token on the blockchain, but it's still a token, right? It's still a non-fungible token that exists, and no one ever calls them NFTs because we just know them as skins, or we just know them as skins, right? Or we know them as characters that you buy. And I think very rarely you'll even have to say this is a digital asset or a digital token. People will just be like, okay, I'm gonna buy this ticket using this app, and this app probably will be on, Polygon, or will be on, will be on some of these L2s, or even some of these L1s that we're using. Um, so on that side of things, when I think about like mass adoption, I think people will still ridicule the word NFT and make fun of it, while like 99% of their life is consumed by these non-fungible tokens that they're using, which they're using today too. I mean, like I talked about in video games, I mean, people, a lot of like the CS:GO community, like Counter-Strike community, like they'll like shit on NFTs, but they're spending quite literally like hundreds of millions of dollars on skins that are non-fungible tokens. So that's one thing. So mass adoption is not necessarily going to accept that word NFT, but I think the caveat to that is, I think that word has been grandfathered into more fine art, kind of upper echelon art communities already, in the form mostly through auction houses, but also through galleries. I think there will come a time where when you talk about NFTs, you will think about, I mean, when most people think about NFTs, they think about people who spend an absurd amount of money buying a JPEG, right? Um, that might seem absurd to the common consumer, but it's not absurd to someone who just spent $10 million for, a splash of paint on a canvas, right? So it's really like about the narrative is so much more nuanced than like this is NFT, this is not. It's really about who is this token being marketed for. And if it's being marketed for people who have the capital to buy things as investments that might seem extremely esoteric, then I think that word NFT really just plays into it all. You're buying these things that are in a closed market that most people don't understand, but even if they did, they just don't have the money to buy them. And so I think in terms of fine art, that word will be grandfathered in. And this is a total prediction, right? Like my prediction is that when it comes to mass adoption, that word NFT won't exist. And if anything, it'll still be ridiculed more or just the same as it is today. But in fine art spaces, that word NFT will be something that will be grandfathered in and will have a lot of weight, and people will understand what it is and trade and buy those things as they do today on OpenSea, or through auction houses, right? What I hope to happen, and honestly, that's what I do hope to happen. Like, I hope that there will be a time where a lot of things just exist on the blockchain and that we use them through, really fast and scalable L2s and L1s and hopefully Ethereum, if it, gets to that point as as an L1. But just everyday things I hope will be on the blockchain just for ease of use. Um, but I also hope that there will be a rift between communication so that we feel like so that in the space we feel like we're part of a more small community. And I know that seems kind of gatekeepish and kind of like not even kind of like really pretentious to say those things, but I mean, if people are spending X amount of money for my art, then there's a certain status of owning one of my works of art, right? And so for me to turn around and say this is not something that I want to be a part of would be kind of hypocritical because I mean, if I'm willing to accept X amount of ETH or X amount of dollars for the work that I'm creating, which is just a piece of art, then I'm actively participating in that community already. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts and expectations for what will happen in the space.
Grant, who should be on the future of art?
Mm, as a show, right?
Yeah, as a guest.
Um, hmm. Do you have Eric already? Snowfro?
Not yet.
I think Snowfro would be really good. Um, I think any of the generative artists, whether they're like the most well-known, or whether they're, artists, generative artists who are well seasoned in the space and in their practice. So like MP Cause or William, Mapan, or any of the art blocks artists. Really, I think a lot of them are experts in their craft, so they can talk about part of the space and part of their practice that I just can't because I'm not a generative artist. But I think being part of that community also creates a different perspective than the lenses that I have, coming from just like being an artist who illustrates on his computer without the use of code. So I think any of the generative artists, maybe the ones that are more prominent in art blocks, would be really good.
That's a great suggestion. We had Jordan Lyle on, who just launched Prohibition art built on the Art Blocks engine. So I think it'd be great to have Snowfro and MP Cause massive fan. So good stuff. Grant, where can people find you? Where do you want to drive people to? I know I want to double down on my recommendation, your pin post. I think just reading through that article and the thought that you put into it and all your inspirations is a great place to start. But where else?
Yeah, just my Twitter. Grant Yoon, GRANTYUN 2, like the number two. No spaces, no underscore, whatever that fucking line is that the people use. No periods, nothing, just GRANTYUN 2. My bio should have my website, which has everything that you need to know about me. And it also has my bio also has my Deca link. So if you wanted to see my floors, like NFT floors, if you wanted to see what's for sale, whether it's my editions or my one-of-ones, like everything as of yesterday that I checked is up to date in pricing and everything. And the Deca guys are really good about it. So that's about it. I mean, my pen post has kind of more in-depth information about my process, and my bio has everything you need to know, whether it's you want to buy something or get in contact with me.
Grant, I appreciate you spending the time. I know you have a lot to do, and I really do believe you're one of those people who are real time crafting the future of art as we know it. So just appreciate you in general.
Too kind, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening and for being part of the future of art. If you liked what you heard, please do subscribe and drop a review on your favorite podcast platform. Onward to the many interviews that await us. The Future of Art is produced by Artifex. Artifex, Artifex, was created to honor today's top digital fine artists in 3 dimensions. Each artist's one-of-one work of art becomes a collectible 3D sculpture and centerpiece of an immersive world built in Unreal Engine, the creation tool of Epic Games. Visit at artifex_project on Instagram to experience those sculptures in AR, and visit artifex.art/unreal to literally step inside the art on your browser.